Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Mr. Horowitz, the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, or PRAC as we're referring to it, without question had a Herculean effort over these last 2 years, as you mentioned in your testimony. But I'd like you to tell the committee, in your opinion, has the PRAC been successful in its mission to date? And then, if you could let the committee know what more can the PRAC and the rest of the oversight community do to stop fraud and identity theft and the bad actors that are out there, and be specific about that as well.
Certainly, and I do think we've been very effective in addressing this Herculean task. As you know, when we were created back in March 2020, we were only overseeing about $2 trillion of federal funds. It grew to over $5 trillion. The key to our ability to do that has been our ability, thanks to this committee's support, the data analytics platform that we've built, the PACE. As I mentioned, nobody can oversee that kind of funding without the ability to get good data. It's what IG Turner just mentioned. You need access to information, and you have to have the systems to be able to run against it. Through doing that, we've identified, for example, multi-dipping across programs, because we've seen individuals applying with the same fraudulent information across programs. We've seen the use of the payment to individuals on do not pay lists and other lists. It's really enabled us to identify, find the fraud, as well as find weaknesses in department programs. So it's been critical. I think there's one bill I'd mention that I think would make a difference. It's the Administrative False Claims Act of 2021, which you are co-sponsoring along with Ranking Member Portman. Senators Hassan and Lankford of this committee are also co-sponsoring it. It would allow us to pursue administratively claims of up to $1 million, not have to go through the district court process. We think that's likely to be a substantial effort, and so we're hoping the Senate will pass that. The bill's on the floor. We've also considered and are thinking about questions related to statutes of limitations. As you know, in prior crises, Congress extended the statute of limitations with regard to bank frauds from 5 years to 10 years. Well, it turns out that the fraud here, even though lenders were giving out the money, the fraud here is often, for example, with the Payment Protection Program, really of the SBA, not the banks. So there's a real question of whether that extended statute of limitations applies. And so loans that were given out in March 2020 would have a statute of limitations potentially, depending on the facts, from March 2025. And given the amount of fraud, that may be an area that's worth considering as well.
Yeah, very good, very good. Mr. Turner, as you well know, probably one of the most high-profile areas for the improper payments and pandemic fraud were in the 54 state and territorial unemployment insurance programs. And as you stated in your testimony today, as well as some of the reports your office has published, there were serious challenges for the DOL OIG to get data from the state workforce agencies to conduct the audits and investigation that you needed to do. I've heard similar concerns about timely and complete access to important data from other IGs as well. Could you please discuss for the committee the impact on IGs when you are unable to get timely and complete access to this critical data?
Yes, Chairman, I'd be more than happy to do so. One of the challenges and one of the issues when we can't get direct access to the information is that it slows the process. So even once you've identified problem areas, it just slows the process down when you actually have to go other ways to get the information. And for us, one of the tools that we have to use was our IG subpoenas. Because we did not have direct access to labor data coming from the states, and there's 54, as you mentioned, states and territories we had to look at. By us not being able to get that information directly, it meant months that the pay problems or fraud problems were able to exist. We tried to go through the DOL to expedite this problem, but DOL had a challenge with the CARES, the extra doctrine with the CARES in terms of some of the information. And part of the problem was that it did not allow them to provide us investigative audit information. We were able to get investigative information, but not audit. So we pushed back because we wanted to get from the department all the information right away, and the department would not allow us to do that. So we went subpoenas, and we went to IG subpoenas. We did 2 rounds of IG subpoenas because that allowed us to get the information that we needed in a more direct fashion. And able to do that, we were able to identify $17 billion of problem areas that came from stolen identification with Social Security numbers. And part of that was through multi-states, multi-claims, through deceased people, as well as through several other areas to include cemeteries with some of the areas that were identified. So those are some of the challenges that we faced.
Great. Well, thank you. Mr. Horowitz, although I know you can only speak on behalf of the PRAC in your role as the IG at DOJ, could you provide this committee any perspective on how successful the DOJ and the FBI have been in obtaining arrests and convictions for pandemic-related fraud? And then on top of that, do you believe that the new chief prosecutor that was announced by the White House earlier this month can improve the government's efforts to address fraud, like we're hearing from UI and the Paycheck Protection Program?
Yes, certainly, Mr. Chairman. The importance of coordination here can't be overstated. And so we are, for example, part of the department's fraud task force. We've separately created at the PRAC our own fraud task force to bring together the IG community with our partners in law enforcement. We've worked very closely with the FBI to ensure that kind of coordination and to provide them with access to certain information that we have through the PACE, but they may actually not have access to. So it's been a very important, collaborative, strong working relationship. I think it's very important, having been in AUSA myself in my prior stint at the Justice Department, having that kind of coordination at the headquarters level is critical. These are issues that aren't limited to one district in the country or one state in the country. They're cross-cutting, they're international in many instances, so it's very important to have that relationship, that connectivity. We have a very strong working relationship. I've already gotten a reach out a couple of times by the new by the new prosecutor that was named the other day, was at a meeting with the AG and the deputy AG to talk about these issues last week. So they are including us, me not just as the IG at Justice, but as the chair of the PRAC.
Great. Well, thank you. Ranking Member Portman, recognized